Look at this photograph. It's from 1870, capturing the heart of what should be a thriving metropolis. Grand boulevards stretch into the distance. Magnificent architecture lines the streets. Everything is in perfect condition. But something is wrong. Something is deeply, profoundly wrong. Where are the people? This isn't just one photograph, it's thousands of them. All across Europe, America, and Russia, the camera lens captured the same haunting scene in the mid to late 19th century. Cities of breathtaking beauty and scale, standing empty, silent, as if the entire population had simply vanished overnight, leaving their coffee still warm on the table. The official explanation is simple. Photography required long exposure times, they tell us. People were blurred out or asked to stand still, creating an illusion of emptiness. It's a neat, tidy answer, one that satisfies those who don't look too closely. But for everyone else, for those willing to ask uncomfortable questions, this explanation crumbles like a house of cards in a hurricane. Because if you actually examine these photographs, if you study them with the eye of an investigator rather than a tourist, you'll see something that changes everything. The chimney stacks are there, hundreds of them, thousands of them, rising from every building. But not a single wisp of smoke emerges from any of them. Not one. Think about what that means. In the 1870s, there was no central heating, no electricity, no gas lines running into homes. Fire was life. Fire was warmth, cooking, light after sunset. A house without smoke from its chimney in winter wasn't just unusual. It was uninhabitable. It was dead. So here we stand looking at entire cities, perfectly preserved, architecturally magnificent, with infrastructure that speaks of thousands upon thousands of inhabitants. And yet they are empty, lifeless. The windows are dark, the streets are silent, and those chimneys, those telltale signs of human habitation, produce nothing but cold air. This is not a photography problem. This is evidence of something far more significant, far more unsettling. And today, we're going to follow this thread wherever it leads, no matter how strange the destination. Our investigation begins not in the photographs themselves, but in the buildings they capture. Because once you start paying attention to the architecture of these supposedly 19th century cities, a disturbing pattern emerges. These structures are not the product of gradual urban development. They are not the result of generations of builders slowly expanding a settlement. They are complete, whole, perfectly planned from the very beginning. Take a moment to think about how cities actually grow. They start as villages, chaotic clusters of buildings erected wherever convenient. Streets wind and curve, following old paths and property lines. Buildings crowd together in organic, irregular patterns. Over time, as the settlement expands, it develops a distinct center and periphery. The core is dense and old, while the edges are newer and more spacious. But the cities in these 19th century photographs show none of this. Instead, we see wide, perfectly straight boulevards radiating from central squares. Buildings of uniform height and style line these streets with mathematical precision. The architecture is grand, almost impossibly grand, featuring facades adorned with intricate sculptures and enormous pillars. This is not organic growth. This is master planning on a scale that shouldn't have been possible in that era. And here's where it gets even stranger. To create such cities, you need more than just architects with vision. You need the infrastructure to support them. You need sewage systems laid before the first building goes up. You need water distribution networks. You need drainage. All of this requires surveying equipment, detailed maps drawn on paper, and teams of trained engineers. But here's the problem. The people we see in these photographs, the few scattered figures who do appear, are often dressed in simple, even primitive clothing. They walk alongside buildings that could house thousands, yet the streets remain largely empty. The contrast is staggering. It's as if two completely different civilizations exist in the same frame. One that built these magnificent cities, and one that merely inhabits them, like hermit crabs in abandoned shells. Look at this photograph from Philadelphia, 1876. A massive boulevard stretches into the distance, lined with buildings of such scale and grandeur that modern city planners would struggle to replicate them today. And in the center of this vast thoroughfare, you can count the people on one hand. 5 individuals in a space designed for thousands. Here's another, from Paris in the 1860s. The famous Rue de Rivoli, with its endless colonnade of arches, stretches away toward the horizon. The architecture is perfect, mathematical, as if drawn by a cosmic compass. But the street is nearly empty. A single carriage, 2 people walking. That's it. And it's not just Europe. Look at this image from New York City, 1870s. Broadway, supposedly one of the busiest streets in America. The buildings tower overhead, their windows reflecting nothing but empty sky. The street itself, which should be choked with commerce and traffic, holds perhaps a dozen visible souls in the entire frame. The strangest part? When you examine these photographs closely, you'll notice something about the few people who do appear. They're often positioned oddly, as if they were added to the scene. Some stand perfectly still in the middle of busy intersections. Others cluster in small groups, isolated from each other by vast stretches of emptiness. They don't look like they belong. They look like they're visiting a place that wasn't made for them. But photographs can be debated. They can be explained away with technical excuses, no matter how weak those excuses might be. So let's turn to something even more concrete, something that cannot be dismissed as a camera trick or an exposure time quirk. Let's talk about the census data. Official records tell us that in 1870, New York City had a population of just under 1 million people. Philadelphia had over 670,000. London boasted more than 3 million inhabitants. These are the numbers written in the history books, the figures we're taught to accept without question. But now look again at these photographs. Look at the scale of the architecture. Count the windows. Estimate the capacity of these buildings. A conservative calculation suggests that the structures captured in these images could house populations 10, 20, even 30 times larger than the official census numbers claim. The math doesn't work. The discrepancy is so vast that it cannot be explained by undercounting or record-keeping errors. And here's where things take an even darker turn, because we're not just looking at empty cities in these photographs. We're looking at cities that show signs of recent construction or renovation, yet lack the workforce necessary to have built them. Where are the construction crews? Where are the stonemasons, the carpenters, the labourers? Where are the quarries that provided the millions of tons of stone? Where are the forests that supplied the timber? These cities don't just lack inhabitants, they lack the entire industrial infrastructure required to create them in the first place. Now, the skeptic in you might say, perhaps the photographs were taken on holidays or during times when people were indoors. But this explanation falls apart when you consider the sheer number of these images taken across decades, in different cities, different countries, different seasons. Always the same result: emptiness. What we're looking at is not a photographic anomaly. It's evidence. Evidence of something that official history has no framework to explain, no willingness to address. These cities were not built by the people living in them during the 19th century. They couldn't have been. The population numbers don't support it. The lack of supporting infrastructure makes it impossible. And most damningly, the inhabitants themselves, visible in these rare photographs, show no signs of being the descendants of the master builders who created these monuments. So if they didn't build these cities, who did? And what happened to the original inhabitants? Where did they go, leaving behind this vast, empty, beautiful world for a handful of newcomers to occupy? Before we can answer those questions, we need to understand one more crucial piece of evidence. Because the mystery of the empty cities doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to another phenomenon from the same era, one that official history treats as entirely separate, but which, upon examination, appears to be intimately linked. We need to talk about the orphans. The 19th century saw an explosion of orphanages across the world, not just a few charitable institutions, but thousands of them appearing suddenly as if responding to some massive global catastrophe. In Great Britain alone, more than 64 large orphanages were founded in just a few decades. But even that staggering number doesn't tell the full story. The scale of this phenomenon defies every normal explanation. Individual institutions were taking in thousands of infants every year. Thousands. Where were these children coming from? Official history offers vague explanations about wars, disease, and the Industrial Revolution creating orphans. But the numbers don't add up. Wars affect specific regions. Diseases, even pandemics, don't create orphans on this scale. An epidemic might kill adults and children alike, but it doesn't selectively eliminate parents while leaving millions of infants alive. And it wasn't just Europe. Across America, Russia, Australia, even in remote colonies, the same story unfolds. Massive institutions rising like mushrooms after rain, filled to capacity with children who had no past, no family, no story. Just endless rows of cribs and blank faces staring up at strangers. The official narrative asks us to believe this is normal, that this is simply what happened during industrialization. But think about it. Think about what it would actually take to create millions of parentless children simultaneously, all around the world. No regional war explains this. No series of epidemics accounts for it. This is something else entirely. Now let's connect these two mysteries. On one hand, we have magnificent cities, built for populations in the millions, standing nearly empty in the 1870s and 1880s. On the other hand, we have an inexplicable flood of orphans, children with no history, no parents, no connection to the past. Is it possible these two phenomena are related? Is it possible that the empty cities needed to be filled and the orphans were the solution? This thought is monstrous. It suggests something so large in scale, so deliberately organized, that the mind recoils from accepting it. But follow the logic. If a global catastrophe depopulated these cities, leaving behind the infrastructure but eliminating the people, what would you do? How would you restart civilization? You couldn't simply move existing populations into these empty spaces. People have ties to their land, their communities, their traditions. They ask questions. They remember. But children, orphans with no memory of parents, no connection to the past, they could be molded, educated, given new histories, placed in these cities as if they had always belonged there. And the evidence supports this disturbing possibility. Consider the orphan trains that ran through America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Officially, these were charitable programs designed to find homes for city orphans in rural areas. But the scale was staggering. More than 200,000 children were transported, distributed to farms and towns across the Midwest. Were these trains just moving orphans? Or were they part of a larger repopulation program, filling empty territories with a new generation that had no memory of what came before? Look at the photographs of these orphan train children. They stand in groups, often in front of grand buildings, empty streets stretching behind them. The same empty streets we see in the city photographs. It's as if these children were being photographed as they arrived to fill the void. But this raises an even more fundamental question. If there was a catastrophe significant enough to depopulate entire cities around the world, what could have caused it? Natural disasters are regional. Diseases, even the worst pandemics in history, don't create this kind of total depopulation. So what are we looking at? To understand this, we need to turn our attention to something hidden in the landscapes of these photographs. Something that appears in image after image, yet is never commented on, never explained. We need to look at the ground itself. In many of these 19th century photographs, especially those from the 1860s and 1870s, you can see something strange about the terrain. Buildings don't sit normally on the ground. Instead, they appear to be emerging from it, as if they were partially buried and then excavated. First floor windows are at ground level, or even below it. Doorways lead down into the earth rather than up into buildings. Entire lower floors are missing, hidden beneath accumulated soil. The official explanation is the cultural layer. Over centuries, historians tell us, dust and debris accumulate, raising the ground level gradually. But this explanation requires centuries, even millennia, to account for the depth of burial we see in these photographs. And we're looking at buildings that were supposedly constructed in the 17th and 18th centuries, just 100 years or so before these pictures were taken. Could a cultural layer accumulate 10, 15, even 20 feet in just a century? Of course not. This burial was rapid, sudden, catastrophic, and the photographs show us exactly what happened. In images from cities across America and Europe, we see something remarkable. We see excavation, not small-scale digging, but industrial excavation on a massive scale. Steam shovels, the giants of 19th century technology, stand in the middle of city streets, removing incredible volumes of earth. Temporary railways have been laid directly through urban areas, with trains hauling away the excavated soil. Look at this photograph from Seattle. A massive steam shovel stands in what appears to be the center of the city, surrounded by piles of earth as tall as buildings. The excavation has revealed structures that were completely buried, their upper floors finally seeing daylight again. Here's another from Kansas City. The photograph is dated 1867, and it shows a building buried up to its second floor. That's approximately 23 feet of soil covering the structure. 23 feet. This isn't gradual accumulation. This is burial by some massive sudden event. But what event? What force could bury cities under this much earth? And why is this not discussed in every history book, taught in every school? This should be one of the most significant events in human history. The burial and subsequent excavation of entire cities. Yet it's treated as a footnote, explained away with vague references to street improvements and grading projects. The scale of the excavation itself is staggering. We're talking about millions of cubic yards of soil being removed from urban centres. In Seattle alone, the amount of earth moved would require thousands of workers, operating for years. And they did this work in the 1880s and 1890s, supposedly just to improve street grades. But where did all this earth go? You can't just disappear millions of tons of soil. Some photographs provide the answer. The earth was loaded onto barges and dumped into the ocean. They were literally throwing away mountains of soil, disposing of it as if it were garbage rather than valuable fill that could have been used elsewhere. Why would anyone go through this incredible effort and expense? The official story makes no sense. But there's another explanation, one that fits all the evidence perfectly. What if these cities weren't gradually buried by cultural accumulation? What if they were buried suddenly by a catastrophe? And what if the excavation wasn't an improvement project, but a recovery operation? What if they were digging out the cities that had been lost? This brings us to the nature of the catastrophe itself. And here, the photographs offer us another crucial clue. In many images from this era, we can see the character of the soil being removed. It's not ordinary earth or dust, it's something else. Something that required a very specific method of removal. Look closely at photographs from the Seattle excavation. You'll see crews using high-pressure water hoses, blasting walls of earth with powerful jets of water. This is a strange way to excavate. Turning earth into mud makes it heavier, harder to transport, more difficult to work with, unless you're not dealing with ordinary earth at all. This same technique was used by gold miners in Alaska to deal with permafrost. Frozen ground that couldn't be dug with normal tools had to be thawed first, melted with water. The similarity is striking. Were they excavating frozen soil in Seattle? Was this permafrost at the 47th parallel, the same latitude as Central Europe? That seems impossible. But what if relatively recently the climate was radically different? What if these regions were subject to sudden, severe cold? Cold that could freeze millions of tons of water and mud, preserving the buried cities like mammoths in ice? Some researchers propose that these cities were hit by ice tsunamis, massive walls of water mixed with ice fragments and debris surging inland from the oceans, burying everything in their path. When this mixture froze, it would have created exactly the kind of frozen mass we see being excavated in these photographs. But this theory, as compelling as it is for coastal cities like Seattle, falls apart when we look at inland locations. Kansas City is nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean at an elevation of almost 900 feet. No tsunami, no matter how massive, could reach it. So if not water, what buried Kansas City? And more importantly, what buried all the other inland cities that show the same patterns of excavation and recovery? The answer might lie in the other great element. Not water, but air. Not tsunamis, but dust storms of apocalyptic proportions. Look at photographs of Kansas City's excavation more carefully. The terrain around the buried buildings has a specific character. It's not smooth like water-deposited silt. It's irregular, wavy, like sand dunes frozen in place. This is the signature of wind-driven deposition, massive quantities of loose soil picked up by sustained high winds and dumped across the landscape. We have modern examples of this phenomenon. In the 1930s, the American Dust Bowl created storms that turned day into night, buried farms under drifts of sand, and forced the evacuation of entire regions. But that catastrophe was regional and temporary. What we're seeing in the 19th century photographs suggests something far worse. A dust storm, or series of storms that lasted long enough to bury entire cities, covering them with tens of feet of loose soil. This explains why the buildings survived. A tsunami would have destroyed them, smashing walls with the kinetic force of moving water. But wind-driven sand doesn't strike. It accumulates, it buries, it preserves. The buildings were entombed, not demolished. And here's the crucial point. Both of these catastrophes, ice tsunamis on the coasts and massive dust storms inland, could have occurred simultaneously. They're both symptoms of the same underlying cause, a sudden dramatic change in the Earth's climate. A change so severe that it simultaneously froze the coastal regions and stripped the interior continents of their topsoil, throwing it into the air in storms that darkened the skies for years. What could cause such a change? What event could be powerful enough to alter the climate of the entire planet in a matter of months or years rather than centuries? The answer brings us to the most disturbing conclusion of our investigation. Because if we accept that these catastrophes happened and the photographic evidence is overwhelming, then we must also accept what it implies about human history. These events didn't occur in deep antiquity. They happened recently, very recently, within the last 200 years. And if they happened that recently, someone remembers, someone knows. and the fact that this knowledge has been suppressed, hidden behind false explanations, and rewritten chronologies suggests that this wasn't just a natural disaster, it was something worse, something that those in power don't want us to understand. Think about what we've discovered. Cities built for millions, standing empty in the 1870s. Millions of orphans appearing simultaneously around the world with no parents, no history. Buildings buried under 20 feet of earth in the span of a few decades. Industrial-scale excavation operations to recover these buried cities. And a complete silence in the official history about any of this. This isn't just missing information. This is active suppression. This is a conspiracy not of silence, but of substitution. The real history was removed and replaced with something safer, something that doesn't raise uncomfortable questions about who built these cities and what happened to them. Consider the timeline. The photographs showing the worst of the emptiness date from the 1860s and 1870s. The massive orphanages begin appearing in the same period. The excavations of buried cities happen primarily in the 1880s and 1890s. And by the early 20th century, the cities are full again. The streets are crowded, life has returned to normal. Except it's not the same normal, it's a new normal. A civilization rebooted, the people living in these recovered cities at the turn of the 20th century aren't the descendants of those who built them. They're the orphans, now grown up, having children of their own. A new population with no memory of the old world, living in structures they didn't create, following a history that was written for them. And what of the original inhabitants, the master builders who created these magnificent cities? Where did they go? The most logical and most terrible conclusion is that they didn't go anywhere. They're still there, buried in the same catastrophe that buried their cities, entombed under the earth, beneath the streets where their descendants would never know to look for them. This explains the orphans. Not all of them, perhaps, but many. These weren't children whose parents died of disease or in war. These were the survivors, the ones who made it through the catastrophe, rescued from collapsed buildings, or found wandering in the aftermath. Children too young to remember clearly what happened, too young to describe the world before. And so they were collected, organized, placed in institutions where they could be raised with a new history, a new understanding of the world, where the questions they might ask about their parents could be deflected with vague stories about epidemics and accidents, where their memories of a different world, if they had any, could be dismissed as childhood dreams. This is why the orphan phenomenon was global. This is why it happened all at once. Because the catastrophe was global. It affected every continent, every civilization. And the response, the repopulation program, had to be equally global in scope. But we still haven't answered the central question. What caused the catastrophe? What force was powerful enough to bury cities under ice and dust simultaneously all around the world? Natural explanations fall short. A meteor impact might cause global climate disruption, but the effects would be relatively uniform. We wouldn't see ice tsunamis in some regions and dust storms in others. A volcanic eruption might throw enough ash into the atmosphere to cool the planet, but again, the effects would be more consistent. No, what we're looking at suggests something more targeted, more deliberate. The pattern of destruction implies multiple causes acting simultaneously, as if different weapons were deployed in different regions. Ice for the coasts, dust for the interior, and everywhere the same result: burial, preservation, erasure. Could this have been a war? Not a war between nations as we understand them, but something larger? A conflict between different civilizations, different levels of technology? The master builders who created these cities clearly possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond what official history credits to the 19th century. If they were capable of building on such a scale, what else were they capable of? And if they possessed such advanced technology, who defeated them? Who had the power to bring down a global civilization and bury its cities under tons of ice and earth? Some researchers point to evidence of advanced weapons in the historical record, devices that could manipulate weather, that could flash freeze entire regions or strip the topsoil from continents. Technologies that sound like science fiction, but which may have been science fact in the hands of a civilization we've forgotten. If such weapons were used, the burial of cities would make perfect sense. It wouldn't be a side effect of natural disaster. It would be the goal. Bury the cities, erase the evidence, remove all trace of the previous civilization so that what comes after can claim to be the first, the original, the only. And that brings us to the final, most important question. Who won? Who survived this catastrophe with enough power and organization to implement a global repopulation program? Who had the resources to excavate the buried cities and refill them with a new generation? Who wrote the history that we're taught today? The answer is in the empty streets themselves. The few people we do see in these photographs aren't random survivors. Look closely at their clothing, their posture, their positioning. Many of them are officials, well-dressed men in formal attire, often standing in groups, often near excavation sites. They're not residents, they're administrators. These are the ones who came after, the ones who found the empty cities and claimed them. Perhaps they were from regions that were spared the worst of the catastrophe. Perhaps they were prepared, somehow, for what was coming. Whatever their origin, they were the ones who organized the response, who built the orphanages, who managed the repopulation, who wrote the new history. And they did write a new history. That much is clear. Because the story we're told about the 19th century bears no resemblance to what the photographs show us. We're taught about industrial revolution, about growing cities, about expanding populations. But the photographs show us empty streets, buried buildings, and millions of children with no past. Why the deception? Why not simply tell the truth about what happened? Perhaps because the truth would raise too many questions. Questions about who the master builders were, questions about the weapons that destroyed them, questions about whether it could happen again. Better to bury the truth along with the cities. Better to create a simple, linear narrative where history progresses smoothly from past to present, with no catastrophic breaks, no lost civilizations, no uncomfortable gaps in the timeline. But the evidence remains. The photographs don't lie. The empty cities stand as silent witnesses to a truth that official history refuses to acknowledge. Something happened in the 19th century, something massive, global, and catastrophic. And in the aftermath, our civilization was quite literally rebuilt from the ground up, populated with orphans who had no memory of the world before. We like to think we understand our past. We trust the history books, the official timelines, the neat explanations provided by experts. But sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Sometimes the evidence is too strong to ignore, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence or photographic anomaly. The empty cities are real. The buried buildings are real. The millions of orphans are real. And the silence surrounding these facts, the determination with which official history avoids discussing them, is perhaps the most damning evidence of all. Because when you find something that history refuses to talk about, something that should be headline news but is instead relegated to footnotes or dismissed entirely, you found something important. You found something true, something that someone, somewhere desperately wants you not to know. So look at the photographs yourself. Study the empty streets. Count the chimneys with no smoke. Measure the scale of the buildings against the handful of people visible in the frame. Read the accounts of the orphanages. the numbers that don't add up, the impossible scale of the phenomenon. Follow the excavations, the millions of tons of earth removed from city centres and dumped into the ocean. And ask yourself what really happened in the 19th century. Why are the cities empty? Where did the people go? And who are we, the descendants of those orphans living in recovered cities following a history that was written to hide the truth? These questions matter, because if our past can be erased so completely, if an entire civilization can be buried and forgotten within a few generations, what does that say about the permanence of our own world? What does it say about the fragility of everything we take for granted? The ghost cities are still there. Walk through any historic city centre and you'll see evidence of the burial and excavation. Lower floors converted to basements, windows that once faced the street now below ground level, streets that were clearly raised, buildings that were clearly excavated. The scars are everywhere if you know how to look. And the orphans? They had children. Those children had children. We are their descendants, living in the world they were given, believing the history they were taught. A history that erased everything that came before, everything that mattered. But the truth is still there, buried like the cities, waiting to be excavated. And once you see it, once you understand what these photographs are really showing us, you can never unsee it. The empty streets become something more than historical curiosities. They become evidence, proof that our world, our civilization, our understanding of the past is built on a foundation of lies. And the greatest lie of all? That this is the first time, that we are the original civilization on this planet, that nothing came before us, when in fact we are living in the ruins of something greater, something that was deliberately destroyed and deliberately forgotten. The photographs don't lie. The empty cities are real. And the truth, like the buildings beneath the earth, is still waiting to be uncovered.